The sun hammered down on Silver Hollow like it had a personal grudge. Elias Crow sat on the porch of what used to be a general store, back against wood so dry it could have been kindling. His hat brim cast a shadow across eyes that had seen too much and somehow kept looking anyway. 58 years old, hands steady, heart slower than it used to be. The town around him was dying the way most border settlements died. One abandoned building at a time, one family packing a wagon in the dead of night, one less light in the windows when evening came. Silver Hollow had been a mining town once, before the silver ran out, before the railroad chose a different route, before it became the kind of place people left behind without looking back. Except Elias never learned how to leave. "You planning to sit there all day?" The voice belonged to Martin Webb, who ran the livery stable with the dedication of a man who refused to admit defeat. He was 62, built like a fence post, and stubborn enough to argue with the weather. "Might," Elias said. "They're coming back." "I know. Sawyer's gang. Heard it from a drifter passed through yesterday. Said they hit Broken Creek 2 weeks ago, killed the sheriff, burned half the town." Elias tilted his hat back just enough to look at Martin properly. Broken Creek had a sheriff? Had. Well, Elias stood, joints protesting the movement. "That's the difference, isn't it?" Martin's jaw worked like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Finally, he just shook his head and walked away, boots kicking up little clouds of dust. Silver Hollow didn't have a sheriff, didn't have a marshal, didn't have anything resembling law except what people made for themselves, and most people weren't interested in making much. The town had maybe 200 souls left, and half of them were too old or too young to matter in a fight. The other half were trying to decide if staying was courage or stupidity. Elias had made his decision a long time ago. He walked down the street, if you could call it that, more like a wide space between buildings where the dirt was packed harder than everywhere else. The saloon sat quiet. Too early for drinking, though he suspected some of the regulars didn't care much about the time. The church had a broken steeple that leaned like it was trying to hear confessions from the ground. 3 houses still had smoke coming from their chimneys. 2 more had boards over the windows. At the end of the street, where the town gave way to scrubland and emptiness, Elias stopped. This was where he always stood when trouble came. Not because it was strategic, not because it gave him some advantage, but because it sent a message that didn't require words. "You want this town? You go through me first." He'd sent that message 11 times in the past 4 years. 11 different gangs. 11 different groups of men who thought Silver Hollow looked easy, who saw the quiet streets and absent law and figured they'd found themselves a place to rest, resupply, and take whatever they wanted. 11 times they'd been wrong. The first gang had been the worst, not because they were the most dangerous, but because Elias hadn't been ready. He'd been sitting in his house, the small place at the north edge of town that he'd built with his own hands 30 years back, when the shooting started. 5 men on horseback, firing into the air, whooping like it was a celebration. They'd kicked in the door of the saloon, dragged out old Samuel Finch and beat him in the street for not pouring whiskey fast enough. Took what they wanted from the general store. Shot Martha Delgado's dog because one of them thought it was funny. Elias had watched from his window, and something in him that had been sleeping a long time woke up angry. He'd walked out into the street with his rifle. Old Winchester, same one he'd carried during the range wars 20 years back. Same one he'd sworn he'd never touch again. "You boys finished?" he'd called out. They'd laughed. 5 against 1. Old man against young wolves. The math seemed obvious. Their leader, kid maybe 25, wearing a bandana like he was playing dress-up, had grinned. "Who the hell are you, Grandpa?" "Just a man asking a question." Elias kept his voice level, calm. "You finished?" "We ain't even started." "Then I'll give you a choice." Elias shifted the rifle, just slightly, not aiming, not yet. "Leave now, and you ride away. Stay, and you don't." The kid's grin had widened. "That a threat?" "It's a fact." What happened next took maybe 15 seconds. The kid reached for his gun. Elias shot him through the shoulder before the barrel cleared leather. The man to his left jerked his horse around, and Elias put a round through the animal's leg. Not to kill it, but to drop it, pinning the rider beneath. The other three scattered, firing wild shots that hit nothing but air and wood. Elias walked forward, working the lever action like breathing. 1 shot, 2, 3. Not killing shots. He put one through a thigh, another through an arm, the third through a horse's saddle, close enough to the rider's leg that the man screamed and fell trying to get away. When the dust settled, 4 men were on the ground bleeding. One was still mounted, staring at Elias like he'd just watched a ghost perform surgery. "Go," Elias said quietly. "Take them with you. Don't come back." They went. That was 4 years ago. Since then, word had spread in the way word spreads among men who live outside the law. Silver Hollow wasn't empty. It had a guardian. An old man who didn't miss and didn't hesitate. Some said he'd killed 20 men. Some said 50. Some said he was a former lawman gone rogue. Others claimed he was a bounty hunter who'd retired to the middle of nowhere. None of it was true. Elias Crow had been a ranch hand, a husband, a father. He'd worked cattle, mended fences, broken horses, and lived a quiet life until the fever came through and took his wife and daughter in the same week. That was 32 years ago. He'd built his house here because the land was cheap and the silence was free. He'd stayed because leaving meant admitting there was somewhere else to go. And when the town started dying, when the good people started running, and the bad ones started circling, he'd made a choice that surprised even himself. He decided to stay. And he decided that anyone who wanted to prey on the broken would have to go through him first. It wasn't heroism, it wasn't duty, it was just the only thing that made sense anymore. Now he stood at the end of the street, waiting. The sun climbed higher, the heat pressed down. Sweat trickled down his back beneath a shirt that had been gray once but was closer to brown now. His rifle leaned against the post beside him. His revolver sat in its holster, weight familiar against his hip. He wasn't a fast draw. Never had been. Speed was for young men who thought quickness could replace accuracy. Elias had learned a long time ago that the man who took his time and hit his target beat the man who rushed and missed every single time. Patience, precision. Those were the tools that kept you alive. And something else. Something harder to name. The willingness to stand when running made more sense. Elias. He turned. Isla Moreno stood a few yards back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She was maybe 40, though life out here had a way of making everyone look older than they were. Dark hair pulled back in a braid, strong shoulders from years of working her family's struggling farm outside town. Eyes that didn't flinch. Isla. Martin says Sawyer's gang is coming. Martin talks too much. Is it true? Elias studied her. She'd lost her husband 3 years back, not to violence, but to a heart that gave out while he was plowing a field that wouldn't grow anything anyway. She'd kept the farm going alone, raised 2 kids on stubbornness and skill. She was one of the few people in Silver Hollow who looked at Elias like he was a man instead of a legend. Probably, he said. How many? Don't know yet. But you'll stand. It wasn't a question. Yeah. She was quiet for a moment, then, why? It was the first time anyone had asked him that directly. Most people just accepted it. The old gunman protects the town. That's how the story goes. But Isla wasn't interested in stories. Because someone has to, Elias said finally. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. She looked at him like she was trying to solve a puzzle, then shook her head. You're going to get yourself killed one of these days. Probably. And then what? Then you figure out what comes next. She didn't like that answer. He could see it in the way her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue, just turned and walked back toward the cluster of buildings, her boots loud against the hard ground. Elias watched her go. The truth was, he'd been asking himself the same question for months now. What happened when he couldn't stand anymore? When age or a bullet finally caught up with him? Silver Hollow would go back to being what it was before, a dying town in the middle of nowhere, easy pickings for anyone who wanted to take. Unless. He pushed the thought away. Wasn't time for that yet. The days stretched long. The heat didn't let up. Elias sat back down, tipped his hat forward, and let the world blur into waiting. It was near sunset when he heard them. Hoofbeats. Distant at first, then closer. The rhythm of multiple riders moving together. Not hurried, not cautious, just the steady pace of men who didn't think they had anything to fear. Elias stood, picked up his rifle, checked the chamber even though he knew it was loaded. They came into view as the sun started painting the sky red. 8 riders. Dust trailing behind them like a banner. They slowed as they reached the edge of town, fanning out into a loose line. The man in the center was easy to spot, bigger than the rest, older. He sat his horse like he'd been born in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a coat that had seen better years. His face was hard, creased with lines that came from squinting into too many sunsets and making too many cold decisions. This was Sawyer. Elias had heard the name before. Different stories, different sources, but the shape was always the same. Sawyer ran a crew that moved through the border territories like a slow-burning fire. They didn't hit big towns, didn't go after places with law. They picked the dying settlements, the forgotten outposts, the towns that nobody cared about, and they bled them dry. "Well now," Sawyer called out, voice carrying easily across the distance. "Heard there was an old man here who likes to play guardian angel. That you?" Elias didn't answer, just stood there, rifle held loose but ready. Sawyer grinned. Strong, silent type. I respect that. He leaned forward in his saddle. "But here's the thing, old-timer. We're not here to cause trouble. Just passing through. Need some supplies, maybe a hot meal, place to rest our horses. We'll pay fair." "Town's closed," Elias said. "Closed?" Sawyer laughed. "That's a new one. Town's closed. You hear that, boys?" The men around him chuckled on cue. "See, I don't think a town can be closed," Sawyer continued. "Towns are for people. We're people. So the way I figure it, we're welcome." "You figured wrong." The humor drained from Sawyer's face. "You know how many men I got here?" 8. "You know how many you got?" 1. "And you think that's going to work out in your favor?" Elias shifted his grip on the rifle. Just slightly. Just enough. "Hasn't failed yet." Sawyer studied him for a long moment. Then he turned his head and spat into the dust. "You got a name, old man?" "Elias Crow." Elias Crow. Sawyer rolled the name around like he was tasting it. Yeah, I've heard that name. Stories about you. Man who stands alone, who doesn't miss, who sent the Barker gang running with their tails between their legs. They could have stayed, Elias said. They chose different. And what about us? We got a choice? Always. Sawyer's jaw worked. He looked at his men, then back at Elias. You really think you can take all 8 of us? Don't have to take all of you, Elias said calmly. Just have to take you. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight, the kind that presses down on a moment and makes it last longer than it should. One of Sawyer's men, young kid with a scar across his cheek, shifted in his saddle. Boss, let me... Shut up, Miller, Sawyer said without looking away from Elias. The kid shut up. Sawyer sat there, thinking, calculating. Elias could see it happening behind his eyes. The math of risk and reward. The knowledge that even if they won, some of them wouldn't walk away. Maybe several of them. Finally, Sawyer smiled. Not friendly, just acknowledgement. You got sand, I'll give you that. He gathered his reins. We'll camp outside town tonight, see how things look in the morning. Morning won't change the answer, Elias said. Maybe not, but I'm a patient man. Sawyer turned his horse. Come on, boys. They rode back the way they came, kicking up dust as they went. Elias stood there until they were out of sight. Then he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His hands were shaking, just barely, just enough to notice. He looked down at them, watched the tremor, and felt something cold settle in his chest. This wasn't fear. He'd been afraid before. This was something else. This was his body telling him what his mind already knew. He was getting old. Behind him, doors started opening. People emerged from buildings like animals coming out after a storm. Martin appeared first, then Isla, then others. They gathered in small clusters, talking in low voices. Elias turned and walked toward his house without speaking to any of them. He had work to do. Inside, the small room was exactly as he'd left it. Table, chair, bed in the corner, stove that he barely used. Shelf with books he'd read so many times the pages were soft as cloth. And against the wall, the case. He opened it. Inside were the tools of his former life. Cleaning kit, extra ammunition, 3 knives, each with a different purpose, and wrapped in oiled cloth, a second revolver. He hadn't used it in years. Tonight, he cleaned both guns until they gleamed in the lamplight, checked every mechanism, loaded and unloaded each chamber until the motion was automatic. Then he sat at his table and did something he hadn't done in a long time. He planned. Sawyer wasn't like the others. The Barker gang had been young and reckless. The Morrison crew had been drunk and stupid. The others had been variations on the same theme, men who thought violence was enough. But Sawyer was different. Elias had seen it in his eyes. This was a man who understood patience, who knew how to wait, how to probe for weakness, how to make the smart play instead of the bold one, which meant standing in the street and daring them to come wouldn't be enough. Elias spread a rough map on the table. Silver Hollow, sketched from memory. Every building, every alley, every line of sight. If Sawyer was patient, he'd look for an advantage. He'd send men around, try to flank, maybe wait until dark, use the confusion. So Elias needed to take away those advantages. He worked through the night, making notes, sketching plans. By the time dawn light started creeping through the window, he had something that might work. It wasn't perfect, but perfect was for young men with unlimited time. He had neither. The next morning, he found Martin at the livery stable. "Need your help," Elias said. Martin looked up from mucking out a stall. "What kind of help?" "The kind you won't like." 20 minutes later, they were moving through the town with purpose. Elias pointed, Martin hauled. They pulled old carts into position, stacked barrels, created obstacles and choke points that would force any attack into predictable channels. "They're going to know what you're doing," Martin said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That's the idea. You're boxing yourself in, or I'm boxing them out." Elias positioned another barrel. "Depends on how you look at it." By midday, Silver Hollow looked different, not fortified. There wasn't enough material for that, but changed, deliberate. The open spaces were smaller. The approaches were narrower. Anyone coming in would have to make choices about where to ride, where to stand, and choices created predictability. Isla found him as he was finishing. "What are you doing?" "Getting ready." "For what?" "For the fact that they're coming back." She looked around at the changed town. "This is going to start a fight." "Fight's already started," Elias said. "Just hasn't reached the shooting part yet. You can't win this alone." "Won't be alone." He met her eyes. "I'll have these." He gestured at the barrels, the carts, the carefully positioned obstacles. "And I'll have the truth." "What truth?" "That I'm not trying to win." His voice was quiet, but certain. "I'm just trying to make losing cost more than they want to pay." She stared at him. "That's not a plan. That's suicide." "Sometimes they're the same thing." Before she could respond, a shout went up from the south end of town. They were back. Elias walked to the street. Same place as yesterday. Same stance. But now the town around him looked different. Narrower. More contained. Sawyer rode in with his 8 men, and Elias watched his face change as he took in the modifications. "Been busy," Sawyer called out. "Had time." Sawyer gestured at the barrels, the carts. "This supposed to scare us off?" "No," Elias said. "It's supposed to make you think." "About what?" "About whether this town is worth what it's going to cost you to take it." Sawyer leaned back in his saddle. "See, that's where you're wrong, old man. We don't need to take the whole town. We just need to take you." He raised his hand. His men spread out, moving to positions that would have given them clear angles if the town hadn't been rearranged. Now they had to cluster closer, had to expose themselves to approach. Exactly what Elias wanted. "Last chance," Sawyer said. "Walk away. Let us do our business. You can even stay in town. We won't touch you. You got my word." "Your word," Elias repeated. "That's right." The same word you gave Broken Creek? Sawyer's expression hardened. You heard about that. Heard you killed their sheriff, burned the town, left bodies in the street. Sheriff drew on us first, and the fire was an accident. That how you remember it? That's how it happened. Elias shook his head slowly. Then we got nothing to talk about. Fine. Sawyer's hand dropped. The world exploded. Gunfire cracked through the air. Elias dove behind the nearest cover, one of the carts he'd positioned, as bullets chewed into wood. He came up firing, rifle to his shoulder, and put a round through the shoulder of the nearest rider. The man screamed and fell from his horse. Sawyer's men scattered, trying to find cover in a town that had been stripped of easy hiding places. Elias moved, working his way between positions he'd already mapped out in his mind. He fired from behind a barrel, then rolled to a doorway, shot from a window, then dropped to ground level. Every movement was deliberate. Every shot was aimed. He wasn't trying to kill them, not yet. He was teaching them a lesson about cost. A bullet clipped his arm, and he felt hot pain bloom, but he kept moving. Dropped another rider with a leg shot, put a round through a third man's hand as he tried to aim. Sawyer was shouting orders, but his men were panicking. They'd expected an easy fight, an old man in the open. Not this. Not a defender who'd turned the entire town into a weapon. Then Elias made a mistake. He moved too soon, broke cover before confirming his next position was clear. A bullet caught him in the side just below the ribs. The impact spun him around and he went down hard, rifle clattering away. Through pain that felt like fire, he saw Sawyer approaching, gun drawn. Should have taken the deal, old man, Sawyer said. Elias's hand found his revolver, drew it, fired. The bullet took Sawyer in the thigh, and the big man went down cursing, both of them on the ground now, both bleeding, both trying to get their guns up. Boss! One of Sawyer's men came running. Elias shot him through the foot, and he fell howling. Then Martin was there, shotgun in hand, and suddenly the math changed. Get out! Martin roared, both barrels aimed at Sawyer. Get out, now! Sawyer looked at his scattered men, 3 down, the rest pinned behind inadequate cover, his own leg bleeding. The old man still armed despite being hit. He made the calculation. Fall back, he snarled. Fall back! They went, grabbed their wounded, and ran for their horses. Within seconds, they were riding hard out of town, leaving dust and blood behind. Elias tried to stand and couldn't. The pain in his side was too much. He felt hands on him, Martin and Isla both, easing him back down. Don't move, Isla said. Her voice was tight, scared. Gotta... Elias coughed, tasted copper. Gotta make sure... They're gone, Martin said. You did it. They're gone. For now, Elias managed. They'll come back. Different approach, different... Shut up, Isla said fiercely. She was pressing something against his side. Cloth. Pressure. Just shut up and let us help you. The world was getting fuzzy around the edges. Elias wanted to argue but couldn't find the strength. Instead, he looked up at the sky, watched it blur and swim, and thought about choices. About standing when leaving made more sense, about the cost of protection, about what came after. Then the darkness came up and took him, and for a while there was nothing but silence and the distant sound of someone calling his name. The pain woke him before the light did. It started somewhere deep in his right side, then spread outward like spilled oil, hot, insistent, impossible to ignore. Elias tried to move and his body sent back a clear message. Don't. He opened his eyes. Ceiling beams. Familiar ones. His own house. Easy. Isla's voice. He turned his head, slowly, because even that hurt, and found her sitting in the chair beside his bed. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair loose instead of braided, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. How long? His voice came out rough, like he'd swallowed sand. 2 days. Sawyer? Gone. Haven't seen them since. She leaned forward. Doc Harris pulled the bullet out, said you were lucky. Missed anything vital by maybe an inch. Don't feel lucky. Yeah, well, you're alive. That's more than you had any right to expect. Her tone was sharp, but underneath it he heard something else. Relief, maybe. Or anger that looked like relief. Elias tried to sit up, made it about 6 inches before the pain flared white hot, and he fell back. I said easy, Isla snapped. You want to tear those stitches open? Because Harris said if you do, you're on your own. He's not coming back out here to patch up a stubborn fool twice. You need to lay still and heal. That's what you need to do. He wanted to argue. Wanted to get up and check the town, make sure the barricades were still in place, confirm that Sawyer hadn't circled back, but his body wouldn't cooperate, and after a moment, he stopped fighting it. Martin? He asked. Fine. Proud of himself, actually. Keeps telling anyone who'll listen how he ran off Sawyer's gang with a shotgun. She paused, which is partially true, I guess. He saved my life. You saved the town, again. Isla stood, moved to the small stove, and poured water from a kettle into a cup. Here, drink this. He took the cup with a hand that shook more than he wanted to admit. The water tasted like rust, but he drank it anyway. They're calling you a hero, Isla said, sitting back down. I'm not. I know that. You know that, but try telling them. She gestured vaguely toward the door. Families are staying. Some who were planning to leave changed their minds. They think you're invincible now. I got shot, which somehow makes it even better in their minds. You got shot and still won. She shook her head. People need myths more than they need truth. Elias drank more water. His side throbbed with each breath, each heartbeat. He thought about Sawyer's face in that moment before the retreat. Not fear, calculation. The look of a man making a business decision. He's coming back, Elias said. Maybe. Not maybe. He lost men, lost face, can't let that stand. So what do you want to do? Stand in the street again? See if you can get shot somewhere more permanent this time? The bitterness in her voice surprised him. Elias studied her face, saw the frustration there, the barely contained anger. You're mad, he said. Of course I'm mad. Isla stood abruptly, started pacing. You stood there alone against 8 armed men. You could have died. You nearly did. And for what? A town that's dying anyway? People who hide while you bleed? Someone has to stand. Why you? She stopped, looked at him directly. Why does it always have to be you? Because there's nobody else. That's not an answer, and you know it. She crossed her arms. Martin stood. He came out with that shotgun when it mattered. Maybe others would too, if you gave them the chance. Or maybe they'd get killed. And what do you think happens when you die? Her voice rose. Because you will, Elias. Maybe not this time, but eventually. A bullet's going to find you, or your body's going to give out, or you're just going to be too slow one day. And then what? We all just accept that the town dies with you? Elias didn't have an answer for that. He'd thought about it, circled around it, but never faced it directly. I don't know, he said finally. Well, you better figure it out. Isla walked to the door. Because I'm tired of watching you throw your life away like it doesn't matter. She left before he could respond. The silence that followed felt heavier than the pain. Elias lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling every one of his 58 years. She was right. He knew she was right. But knowing something and being able to change it were different things. He'd been standing alone for so long, he didn't know how to do it any other way. The days crawled past. Doc Harris came by once, checked the wound, grunted something that might have been approval, and left without much conversation. Martin visited more often, bringing food that Elias barely touched and news from the town. The barricades were still up. People were talking about keeping them, making them permanent. A few families had even started reinforcing their homes, boarding up windows, creating defensible positions. They're learning, Martin said on his 3rd visit, watching what you did, thinking about how to protect themselves. That's good, Elias said, and meant it. You're still a damn fool for standing alone. Isla tell you to say that? Didn't have to. I got eyes. Martin sat in the chair, which creaked under his weight. But I understand it. I do. Sometimes a man's got to make a stand just to prove he's still worth something. That's not why, isn't it? Martin's weathered face was knowing. You lost your family, lost your purpose. This town became the thing you protect because you couldn't protect them. I get that. But Elias, you can't save everyone, and you can't punish yourself forever. Elias looked away. You sound like a preacher. I sound like someone who's known you 30 years and wishes you'd stop trying to die for something that's already gone. The town's not gone. I'm not talking about the town. Martin left after that, and Elias was alone with thoughts he didn't want to examine. On the 6th day, he managed to stand. It hurt like hell and took twice as long as it should have, but he got vertical. Walked 3 steps to the window, looked out at Silver Hollow. The street was quiet, peaceful even. A couple kids were playing near the old church, their laughter carrying on the dry air. Smoke rose from chimneys, normal life, or what passed for it out here. He'd protected this. Him and Martin and the choices he'd made 4 years ago. But for how long? That night, Isla came back. She brought soup this time, real soup, with vegetables and chunks of meat that must have cost more than she could afford. Set it on the table without comment. Thank you, Elias said. Don't thank me yet. You haven't tasted it. But she sat down while he ate, and they existed in silence that was almost comfortable. When he finished, she spoke. I've been thinking about what I said, about you standing alone. You were right. I know I was right, but I was also angry. She met his eyes. You scare me, Elias, not because you're dangerous, because you don't seem to care if you live or die, and people who don't care make bad decisions. I care. Do you? He started to argue, then stopped. The truth was complicated. He cared about the town, about the people, but his own life. That had felt finished for a long time now. When my husband died, Isla said quietly, I wanted to quit, sell the farm, take the kids and leave, go somewhere easier, somewhere that didn't hurt so much to wake up in. Why didn't you? Because leaving meant giving up, and I'm not built that way. She leaned back. But I also learned something. Being stubborn isn't the same as being smart, and dying for a cause doesn't help anyone if the cause dies with you. What are you saying? I'm saying teach me. Elias blinked. What? Teach me how to do what you do, how to stand, how to shoot, how to make the hard choices. Her voice was steady, determined. You said someone has to stand, fine, but it doesn't have to be just you. It's not that simple. Why not? Because, he struggled for words, because people get hurt, people die. I've seen it, I've caused it. And you think I haven't seen death? Haven't caused it? She shook her head. I killed a man once, 3 years ago. He tried to rob the farm while my kids were sleeping. I shot him with my husband's old rifle. He bled out in my yard while I stood there watching. Elias hadn't known that. Isla, so don't tell me I can't handle it. Don't tell me I'm not ready. She leaned forward, intense. I'm not asking to replace you. I'm asking to stand with you, to learn while you can still teach. The weight of that settled over the room. It was the conversation he'd been avoiding, the question he didn't want to answer. What came after? If I do this, he said slowly, it changes things. You stop being just a farmer. You become a target. I'm already a target. We all are. You're just the only one doing something about it. Your kids need a mother who can protect them, who can protect this town when you can't. She didn't blink. You know I'm right. You know this makes sense. He did. Every practical part of him understood that. But there was another part, the part that had stood alone for so long, that resisted. It's not just shooting, he said. It's knowing when not to shoot, when to talk, when to stand down, when to escalate. Then teach me that. It's making choices that get people killed. I've made those choices already. It's living with those choices after. I'm already doing that too. Elias looked at her, really looked, saw the determination, the strength, the same quality he'd recognized when she'd first moved here, the refusal to break. All right, he said. Something shifted in her expression, not relief, recognition. When do we start? She asked. When I can stand without wanting to fall over. Tomorrow, then. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Yeah, tomorrow. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. Elias? Thank you. I haven't taught you anything yet. You taught me that standing matters. That's more than most people ever learn." After she left, Elias sat in the growing darkness and thought about what he'd just agreed to. Training someone meant passing on more than skills. It meant sharing the weight, the burden, the knowledge that protection came at a cost, and sometimes that cost was measured in lives. But it also meant the town might survive him, and maybe that was worth it. 3 days later, they started. Elias could walk now without feeling like his insides were tearing loose. The wound still hurt, but it was manageable. Isla met him at dawn behind his house, where the land opened up into scrubland. "You know how to shoot?" he asked. "I know which end the bullet comes out of. Show me." She had a rifle, the same one she'd used to kill the man who'd tried to rob her farm. It was old, like most weapons out here. Well maintained, though. She knew how to care for it, at least. Isla raised it, sighted on a post maybe 50 yards out, and fired. The post exploded in a shower of splinters. "Not bad," Elias said. "I don't miss much." "Shooting a post isn't shooting a person." "I know that." Her voice was level. "I've done both." He nodded. "All right, then we start with what most people get wrong." "Which is?" "They think shooting's the hard part." Elias walked out into the open space. "It's not. Shooting's easy. It's everything else that's hard." He spent the next hour showing her what he meant. Not how to aim, she already knew that, but how to move, how to use cover, how to think 3 steps ahead. "You see those rocks?" He pointed to a cluster maybe 30 yards away. "Someone shoots at you from there. What do? Shoot back." "Wrong. First you get to cover, then you assess, then you respond." He walked her through it, because the first shot doesn't decide the fight. The first mistake does. She listened, absorbed, asked questions that showed she was thinking, not just memorizing. They worked until the sun climbed high and the heat made everything shimmer. Then they sat in the shade and Elias talked about the gangs he'd faced, what made each one different, the patterns he'd learned to recognize, the signs that something was about to turn violent. "Most men telegraph their moves," he said. "They get tense before they draw. Their eyes shift. Their weight changes. You learn to read that, and you've got an advantage worth more than speed." "What about Sawyer?" Isla asked. "What did you read from him?" "Calculation. He's not reactive, he's patient." Elias took a drink from his canteen. "That makes him more dangerous than the others, because a patient man will wait for the right moment instead of forcing it." "So what do? We make sure the right moment never comes." They met every morning after that, sometimes at dawn, sometimes earlier. Elias pushed her hard, but not recklessly, showed her how to clear a jammed rifle in darkness, how to reload without looking, how to estimate distance and wind and account for both. But more than that, he taught her to think like someone who had to make impossible choices. "You're protecting the town," he'd say. 3 riders come in. They're armed, but they haven't drawn. They say they just want supplies. What do? Ask them to leave weapons outside town. They refuse. Then they don't come in. They draw. I shoot. Which one first?" She'd pause. Think. The leader. The others might back down. Or they might panic and start firing wild. Now you've got bullets flying near buildings with families. He'd make her walk through it. Consider every angle. There's no perfect answer, just the one you can live with. The days became weeks. Isla got better. Not just at shooting, though that improved too, but at the harder things. The judgment calls, the willingness to stand when every instinct said run. And Elias watched her transform from a farmer who could shoot into something else. Someone who understood that protection wasn't about violence. It was about the willingness to use violence so others didn't have to. One morning, Martin joined them. "Figured I should learn too," he said, hefting his shotgun, "since I apparently decided to become a gunfighter in my old age." Elias almost smiled. "Shotgun's a good choice for you. Don't have to be precise, just committed." They worked together, the 3 of them, practiced scenarios, talked through situations, built something that looked almost like a plan, and the town noticed. People started nodding to Isla in the street, not with pity anymore, but with respect. They saw her training with Elias and understood what it meant. The old guardian wasn't alone anymore, but not everyone approved. "You're making a mistake," Doc Harris said one evening. He'd stopped by Elias's house under the pretense of checking the healing wound, training her, getting her involved. "She asked to learn, and you should have said no." Harris packed his medical bag with sharp, precise movements. "You know what happens to people who stand in the way of men like Sawyer? They die, and usually their families die with them." "She knows the risks. Does she? Really?" Harris straightened. "Or is she just desperate to mean something in a dying town, and you're giving her a way to feel important?" The accusation stung because there was truth in it. Elias had wondered the same thing. Was he helping Isla or using her? Passing on knowledge or passing on his own need to stand? "I think she's stronger than you give her credit for," Elias said finally. "Strength doesn't stop bullets." Harris moved to the door. "Just remember that when she's bleeding out in the street, when her kids are asking why their mother decided to play hero." He left, and Elias sat alone with doubts that had teeth. That night he almost called it off, almost told Isla that Harris was right, that this was a mistake, that she should go back to her farm and her children and let him handle the protection alone. But then he thought about what happened when he died, because he would. Harris was right about that too. A bullet or age or simple bad luck would catch him eventually, and if he hadn't passed on what he knew, the town died with him. So the next morning, when Isla showed up, he taught her about doubt. "You're going to question yourself," he said. "Every decision, every choice. You're going to wonder if you did the right thing, and sometimes you're going to be right to wonder because you'll make mistakes." "How do you handle it?" she asked. "I don't. I just keep moving. Because standing still means thinking too much, and thinking too much means you stop standing at all." She absorbed that. "That's bleak. It's honest." They worked through scenarios that morning, harder ones. A gang takes hostages. You have a clear shot at the leader, but a woman's in the way. What do you do? Isla struggled with it, tried different answers. None of them felt right because none of them were. "Sometimes there is no good choice," Elias said. "Just the one that keeps the most people alive. And you have to live with that." She looked at him. "How many times have you made that choice?" "More than I can count." "Does it get easier?" "No." The honesty seemed to help her more than any lie would have. 6 weeks after the shooting, Elias woke to the sound of hoofbeats. He was on his feet before he was fully conscious, rifle in hand, moving to the window. Dawn light, barely. 5 riders coming hard from the east, but not Sawyer's men. These riders were scattered, panicked. He could see it in the way they rode, desperate, looking back over their shoulders, running from something. Elias was out the door and in the street within seconds. Isla emerged from the old saloon where she'd been sleeping on the night she stayed in town. Martin appeared from the livery. The riders saw them and slowed. The lead horse was lathered with sweat, nearly finished. The man on it looked worse, blood on his shirt, face gray with pain. "Sawyer," he gasped. "Coming, maybe an hour behind, told us," he coughed, "told us to warn you." Elias felt something cold settle in his gut. Why? "Because he wants you to know." The man swayed in his saddle. "Wants you to have time to think about it. To run, if you're smart." "How many?" 20, maybe more. Picked up reinforcements from the territories." The man's eyes were glassy. "I was with him. Was. But this ain't about supplies anymore. It's about you, about what you did to him." The man fell from his horse. Isla and Martin caught him, lowered him to the ground. "Get him to Harris," Elias said. Then he turned and looked at the town. 20 men, maybe more. This wasn't a raid, it was a war party. And they had maybe an hour to prepare for it. "Isla," he said quietly, "this is what we trained for, but I won't hold it against you if you want to leave. Take your kids and go. Get clear." She stood, met his eyes. "No. You don't understand what's coming." "I understand fine." Her voice was steady as stone. "Someone has to stand. That's what you taught me. So I'm standing." Martin checked the loads in his shotgun. "Me too, I suppose. Too old to run anyway." Elias looked at them both. 2 people. Against 20 or more, so based by the math was impossible. But then it always had been. "All right, he said. Then we make them pay for every inch." And they had 47 minutes. That's what Elias figured, accounting for tired horses and the fact that Sawyer would want to arrive with his men organized, not strung out and exhausted. 47 minutes to turn a dying border town into something that could survive 20 armed men who wanted blood. "Get everyone inside," Elias said. "Families, children, anyone who can't fight. The church has the thickest walls." Martin was already moving, his shotgun over his shoulder as he jogged toward the nearest houses. His voice carried through the morning air, sharp and commanding in a way Elias had never heard from him before. Isla stood watching Elias, waiting. "You remember the drill?" he asked. "Every word." "Good, because we're about to find out if any of it works." He started walking, and she fell in beside him. "We can't hold the whole town. Too much ground, too few guns. So we give them a killing field and make them walk through it." They discussed this scenario during training. Elias had hoped they'd never need it, but hope and preparation were different things. The barricades from the last fight were still in place, weathered now, but functional. Elias and Isla moved through the town like they were setting a trap, which they were. They repositioned carts to create narrower approaches, stacked crates to provide cover that looked random, but created specific firing lanes. Every adjustment was deliberate. "Here," Elias said, pointing to a gap between 2 buildings. "You set up there. Good angle on the main street, protected flank, exit route through the back if things go bad." "What about you?" "I'll be in the open." "That's suicide." "It's bait." He met her eyes. "Sawyer's coming for me. If I'm visible, exposed, he'll focus there. That gives you and Martin freedom to operate. And when they shoot you, then you make them regret it." She didn't like it. He could see the argument forming behind her eyes. But she also understood the logic, and more importantly, she trusted him enough not to question it. 40 minutes, she said instead. They kept working. Doors opened as people emerged, confused and frightened. Martin was herding them toward the church, but some resisted. A woman named Catherine, who ran the boarding house, wanted to stay and defend her property. Old Samuel Finch refused to hide, said he'd rather die on his feet. "Then die useful," Elias told him, handing the old man a rifle. "You can still shoot straight?" "Straight enough." Elias positioned him at a second-story window in the boarding house. High ground, protected position, clear sight lines. Samuel wouldn't last in a close fight, but from up there he could make a difference. More people came out as word spread. Not many. Silver Hollow didn't have many left to give. But there was Daniel Cross, the blacksmith, built like a bull and carrying a hammer that could crack skulls. There was Maria Santos, whose husband had died in a mine collapse years back, now holding a revolver like she knew how to use it. 7 people total, counting Elias. 7 against 20 or more. "Listen to me," Elias said, gathering them in the street. His voice was calm, steady. "Most of you aren't fighters. That's fine. Today you don't need to be. You just need to follow instructions and make them think twice about what they're doing." "We're gonna die," someone said. Elias thought it might have been Daniel. Maybe. Probably. He looked at each of them in turn. But dying scared and dying fighting look different, and sometimes the difference matters. It wasn't a rousing speech, wasn't meant to be. These were people who'd chosen to stay in a place that offered them nothing but dust and hard living. They didn't need inspiration, they needed honesty. 30 minutes, Martin called out. Elias sent them to their positions. Daniel at the livery entrance with his hammer and a pistol. He probably didn't know how to reload. Maria covering a side alley. 2 others he barely knew taking spots that would make Sawyer's men think the town had more defenders than it did. The stranger who'd warned them was laid out in Doc Harris's office, unconscious from blood loss. Harris himself was moving between positions with his medical bag, preparing for the aftermath. "You should leave," Elias told him, "while you still can, and miss the chance to tell you I told you so while I'm patching you up?" Harris shook his head. "I'll stay. Someone's going to need stitching when this is over. If anyone's left to stitch, there's that optimism I've come to expect. Elias almost smiled. Almost. He checked his weapons for the 10th time. Rifle loaded, revolver loaded. Second revolver tucked in his belt, knife in his boot. Ammunition distributed in pockets where he could reach it without looking. Everything the same as it had been 6 weeks ago, except now his side still ached where the bullet had torn through, and he was 58 instead of 57, and there were 20 men coming instead of 8. Small differences. Elias. Isla's voice quiet. He turned and found her standing close, rifle held across her chest. If this goes wrong, she started. It's already wrong. We're just deciding how wrong. My kids. If I don't... She stopped, collected herself. There's money hidden under the floorboards in my house. Not much, but enough. Make sure they get it. Make sure they know. Tell them yourself, Elias interrupted. When this is over. You really think we can win this? He considered lying, decided she'd earned the truth. No, he said, but I think we can make it cost more than Sawyer wants to pay. And sometimes that's the same thing as winning. She nodded, adjusted her grip on the rifle, started to turn away, then stopped. Thank you, she said, for teaching me. Don't thank me yet. Why not? Because I might have just taught you how to die instead of how to live. Maybe, Isla said, but you also taught me that some things are worth dying for. She walked to her position before he could respond. Elias stood alone in the center of the street, the same place he'd stood a dozen times before, and waited. The town was quiet now, everyone in place or hidden. The sun climbed higher, turning the dust bright and the shadows sharp. Heat pressed down like a physical weight. 15 minutes. He thought about his wife, about his daughter, about the 32 years since he'd buried them both and the choices he'd made to fill the space they'd left behind. Standing in empty streets against men who deserved killing wasn't the same as having a family, but it was something. It gave the days meaning, and maybe that was enough. 10 minutes. His hands weren't shaking now. That surprised him. He'd expected them to shake, expected his body to rebel against what his mind was planning, but they were steady, ready. 5 minutes. The sound reached him before the sight did. Hoofbeats, many of them, the low thunder of horses moving in formation. Elias took a breath, let it out slow. They came from the east, just like the warning had said, but it wasn't 20 men, it was closer to 30. They rode in a loose column that spread wider as they approached, filling the road, flanking out into the scrubland. Sawyer was at the front, sitting his horse like a monument. His leg was bandaged where Elias had shot him, but he sat straight, unbothered. Behind him came men of every type, young and old, clean and filthy. Some looked professional, like they'd been soldiers once. Others looked like they'd murder their own mothers for $1. All of them armed. All of them watching the town with eyes that had already decided it was theirs. They stopped 50 yards out. Sawyer stared at Elias. Elias stared back. The silence stretched. Sweat ran down Elias's spine. His finger rested alongside the trigger guard of his rifle. Not on the trigger. Not yet. You had to know this was coming, Sawyer called out finally. I knew. And you stayed anyway. Yes. Why? Sawyer sounded genuinely curious. This town's got nothing. No gold, no silver, no value except what's walking around on 2 legs. Why die for it? Because someone has to stand. That's not a reason. That's a slogan. Sawyer leaned forward in his saddle. I did some asking around after our last encounter. Found out about you. About your family. About how you've been here alone for 3 decades, protecting a place that's already dead. Elias said nothing. You're not protecting the town, Sawyer continued. You're protecting a memory, and that's sad, old man. That's the saddest thing I ever heard. You done talking? Almost. Sawyer gestured to his men. See? I brought all these boys here to make a point, to show you that standing alone doesn't work, that you can't win, that everything you've done for the last 4 years was just delaying the inevitable. Then why are you still talking instead of shooting? Sawyer's jaw tightened. Because I'm giving you one last chance. Walk away. Leave the town. Let us do what we came to do. You can live. That's more mercy than you showed my men. Your men are still alive. Crippled. Useless. Sawyer's voice went hard. You took things from them that mattered. Pride, function, future. So yeah, they're breathing, but that ain't the same as living. Should have thought about that before you came to my town. Your town? Sawyer laughed. You don't own this place. You're just a squatter with a gun and a death wish. Maybe, but I'm the squatter standing in your way. The laughter died. Sawyer sat back, studied Elias like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. I got 30 men, Sawyer said quietly. You got what? 3? 4? Even if you fight perfect, even if every bullet you fire drops one of mine, the math doesn't work. You know that. I know. Then why? Because the math's not the point. Elias shifted his stance slightly, settling his weight. The point is making you pay for every inch, making it hurt so bad that the next town you ride toward, you'll remember Silver Hollow and think twice. That's it? You're making an example of yourself? I'm making a choice. Same as you did when you brought 30 men to kill an old man. Something flickered in Sawyer's eyes. Respect, maybe. Or just the recognition of inevitability. All right then, Sawyer said. He raised his hand. No more talking. His hand dropped. The world exploded into noise and motion. Sawyer's men charged, spreading wide, and Elias fired. His first shot took the nearest rider in the chest, and the man toppled backward, horse screaming and bolting. His second shot hit another in the shoulder, spinning him sideways. The third punched through a horse's neck, and the animal went down thrashing, pinning its rider. Then he was moving, diving behind the nearest cart as bullets chewed into wood and dirt where he'd been standing. He came up firing, working the lever action like breathing, and dropped another man from his saddle. From the boarding house, Samuel's rifle cracked. A rider jerked and fell. From the alley, Isla's gun spoke, measured, precise. One shot. A man screamed. Another shot. Another scream. Sawyer's charge faltered as men suddenly realized they were riding into a coordinated defense instead of picking off a lone target. They scattered, looking for cover that Elias and Isla had specifically denied them. Martin's shotgun boomed from the livery entrance, both barrels, and 2 men went down in a spray of buckshot. But there were too many. They kept coming, firing from horseback, dismounting, and taking positions. Bullets sang through the air like angry hornets. Wood splintered, glass shattered. Someone was screaming, one of Sawyer's men or one of the defenders. Elias couldn't tell. He fired until his rifle clicked empty, dropped it, drew his revolver. Shot a man trying to flank from the left. Shot another climbing through a window. His side was on fire where the old wound protested the movement, but he ignored it. A bullet clipped his shoulder and he spun, returning fire in the same motion. Missed, fired again, hit. The noise was overwhelming, continuous thunder. Smoke filled the street, burning his throat, making his eyes water. He saw Daniel go down, hammer still raised, a red bloom spreading across his chest. Saw Maria fall back into the alley, clutching her arm. Saw one of the others, couldn't remember his name, drop without a sound. But Sawyer's men were falling too. More of them. The barricades forced them into killing zones. The positioned defenders created crossfire. Every advantage Elias had planned was working. Just not enough. He reloaded behind cover, fingers working automatic. 6 rounds. Snap the cylinder closed. Lean out and fire. A man trying to climb the boarding house stairs fell backward. Samuel's rifle cracked again from above, then went silent. Elias risked a glance up, saw the old man slumped in the window. Dead or wounded, he couldn't tell. Isla was still fighting. He could hear her rifle, the steady rhythm of someone who'd learned to pace themselves. 1 shot every 3 seconds, each one deliberate, each one hitting. She'd learned well, too well. Because Sawyer noticed. Elias saw him gesture, saw 3 of his men peel off and head toward Isla's position, saw them moving to flank her, surround her, end her. He ran. His body screamed protest, but he ignored it, sprinting across open ground toward the alley where Isla was positioned. Bullets kicked up dirt around him. Something tugged at his jacket. His hat flew off. He made it to the corner, leaned around, and fired 3 times fast. Dropped the first man approaching Isla, wounded the second. The third ducked back. "Behind you!" Isla shouted. Elias turned, and a man was right there, too close, rifle swinging toward his face. He threw himself sideways, felt the stock whistle past his head, came up with his revolver and fired point blank into the man's stomach. The man fell, screaming. Elias's revolver clicked empty. He dropped it, drew the second one from his belt, turned back to Isla's position. She was down. Not dead. Moving. But down, blood on her face, rifle knocked away. A man stood over her, pistol aimed at her head. Elias shot him through the throat. The man made a wet, gurgling sound and collapsed. Elias reached Isla, grabbed her arm, hauled her up. Her eyes were unfocused, blood running from a gash on her temple. "Can you shoot?" he asked. She blinked, focused, nodded. He retrieved her rifle, pressed it into her hands. "Then shoot." They fought back to back in the alley. Elias with his last revolver, 6 shots left. Isla with her rifle, maybe 10 rounds remaining. They made each one count, but the numbers kept shrinking. Martin's shotgun had gone quiet. Daniel was dead. Maria was down. Samuel was down. The other defenders were gone, fled or killed, or both. It was just Elias and Isla now, against Sawyer and maybe 15 men still standing. The math had never worked. Now it was impossible. "We need to fall back," Isla said, her voice tight with pain. "Get to the church." "Won't matter. They'll just burn us out." "Then what?" Elias looked at her. At this woman who'd asked him to teach her how to stand, who'd learned too well, who was going to die in a dusty alley because he'd said yes. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For getting you killed." She actually smiled, blood on her teeth. "I got myself killed. You just showed me how to make it mean something." A shadow moved at the end of the alley. Elias raised his revolver, but Isla's rifle barked first. The shadow fell. 5 rounds left in his revolver. Maybe 8 in her rifle. "When I say run," Elias said quietly, "you run. Don't argue. Don't look back. Get to your kids." "No." "Isla," I said no. Her voice was hard as iron. "We stand together or we don't stand at all. You taught me that." "I taught you to survive. You taught me that some things matter more than surviving." Before he could respond, Sawyer's voice cut through the chaos. "Elias Crow!" The shooting slowed, stopped. An eerie quiet descended, broken only by the moans of wounded men and the crackle of something burning. Elias looked at Isla. She looked back. Together they stepped out of the alley into the street. Sawyer stood in the center of the road, surrounded by his remaining men. He was bleeding from a wound in his side, limping from the old leg injury, but he was upright and angry. The town around them was a wreck, buildings shot to pieces. Bodies in the street. Smoke rising from 6 fires. It looked like a battle had been fought here. It had. "You cost me 17 men," Sawyer said. His voice was hoarse, strained. 17. Elias said nothing. Beside him, Isla stood steady despite the blood running down her face. "And for what?" Sawyer gestured at the destruction. "The town's still ours. You're still gonna die. Nothing's changed except the count of bodies." "You're wrong," Elias said. "About what?" "Everything changed." Elias raised his revolver. It shook now, his arm tired, his body failing. "You rode in here with 30 men thinking you'd take what you wanted. Now you got 13 left and you're standing in a town that fought back. Next time you want to prey on the weak, you'll remember how many men it cost you here." "There won't be a next time for you." "No," Elias agreed, "but there'll be a next town. And maybe they'll hear about today. Maybe they'll fight too. And maybe the time after that, you won't have enough men left to make it worth the ride." Sawyer's face twisted. "You're a fool." "Probably, but I'm a fool who made you bleed." Sawyer raised his gun. So did his men. Isla brought up her rifle. Elias aimed his revolver at Sawyer's chest. The moment stretched, hung there, balanced on the edge of final violence. Then a voice shouted from behind Sawyer's men, "Drop your weapons!" Everyone turned. Martin stood there, somehow still alive, shotgun reloaded and aimed. Beside him was Doc Harris with a rifle. And beside them were the families from the church, spilling out, armed with whatever they could find. Not many, maybe 12 people total, but enough to change the math again. "You're surrounded," Martin said. "Put the guns down, or we put you down." Sawyer looked around, counted, did the calculation. 13 against 15, with his men tired and wounded and the defenders positioned in multiple directions. "You can try," Sawyer said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "We already did," Elias said quietly, "and we're still standing." The standoff held. Wind blew dust through the street. Someone's horse whinnied in the distance. The sun beat down on a town that had become a battlefield. Sawyer lowered his gun. "Fall back, he said to his men. "Boss, I said fall back." Sawyer's voice cracked like a whip. "We're leaving." The men hesitated, then obeyed. They gathered their wounded, mounted their horses, and started riding out. Slow at first, then faster, until they were disappearing into the eastern distance, leaving only dust and silence behind. Elias stood in the street, revolver still raised, until they were completely gone. Then his arm dropped and his legs gave out. Isla caught him, kept him from falling all the way down. "You did it," she said. "You crazy old man, you actually did it." "We did it," he corrected. His voice was barely a whisper. Around them, people emerged, checking the wounded, counting the cost. Martin was crying, Elias realized. The old man was standing there with tears running down his weathered face. 5 defenders were dead, 3 more wounded, but the town still stood, and Sawyer was gone. Doc Harris knelt beside Elias, already opening his medical bag. "You're hit," he said. 3 times that I can see. Maybe more." "Yeah," Elias managed. "Feels like more." "You're going to die if I don't work fast." "Then work fast." Harris did. Isla helped. Around them, the town started picking itself up, started the hard work of surviving what came after the fighting stopped. Elias closed his eyes and let them work. His body was finished, done. He could feel it giving up, feel the darkness creeping in from the edges. But the town was still there, and that was enough. He woke to pain that had become familiar. Not the sharp, immediate agony of fresh wounds, but the deep, grinding ache of a body that had been broken and poorly repaired too many times. Every breath hurt. Every heartbeat sent waves of discomfort through his chest and side. His left arm felt like it was on fire. Elias opened his eyes. The ceiling was wrong, not his house. Took him a moment to place it. The boarding house. Catherine's place. 2nd floor room that got morning light through a window facing east. About time. Doc Harris sat in a chair by the bed, looking older than Elias remembered. His medical bag sat open on the floor beside him, instruments cleaned and arranged with the precision of a man who'd spent his life putting broken things back together. "How long?" Elias's voice came out rough. 4 days? Harris stood, moved to check his pulse, fingers cold and professional against Elias's wrist. "You were shot 3 times. Once in the shoulder, once in the left arm, once through the meat of your thigh. The shoulder's the worst, shattered the bone. I put it back together as best I could, but you're not going to have full range of motion. Probably never again." "Can I shoot?" "That's your first question? Not, will I walk or will I live?" Harris shook his head. "You can shoot, just not as well, and not for long before the arm gives out." Elias processed that. A gunman who couldn't hold a rifle steady was a dead gunman, but he'd been moving toward dead for years now. This just made it official. "The town?" he asked. Still standing. Harris moved to the window, looked out. "Barely. We lost 5 in the fight. Daniel Cross, Maria Santos, Samuel Finch, and 2 others. 3 more wounded bad enough they might not make it. Martin's got a bullet fragment in his shoulder that I can't get out without risking the artery. Isla's got a concussion and 14 stitches in her scalp. And the families? Scared. Some want to leave. Some are too stubborn. Catherine's organizing rebuilding efforts like we just survived a storm instead of a war." "Baspetten I oswom," Harris turned back to face him. You did something, Elias. I don't know if it was smart or stupid, but you did it. Sawyer? Gone. Hasn't been seen since. Word is he lost so many men that the survivors scattered. His crew's done. Harris sat back down. You broke him. Elias closed his eyes. 17 of Sawyer's men dead or crippled. 5 of Silver Hollow's defenders gone. The math of violence was always ugly when you added it up afterward. You need to rest, Harris said. Your body's been through too much. You're not young anymore, and healing takes time you don't have. How much time do I have? Harris was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, the way you've been pushing yourself, year, maybe 2, that shoulder wound would have killed a weaker man. The infection nearly did kill you. Your heart's not strong. Your lungs sound like you've been breathing dust for decades, and your body's just tired, Elias. It's done. Then I better make the time count. You're not hearing me. Harris leaned forward. You can't protect this town anymore, not physically. You barely survived this fight, and that was with help. Next time, if there is a next time, you won't be able to stand. You need to accept that. I'm not dead yet. You're not far from it either. Harris stood, gathered his bag. I'm telling you this as your doctor and your friend. Your fighting days are over. Find another way to matter. He left before Elias could respond. The room felt too quiet after he'd gone. Elias lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the truth of Harris's words in every aching muscle. His body was giving him the same message. Time to stop. Time to let go. But letting go meant the town was vulnerable again. And vulnerable meant Sawyer might come back. Or someone like him. Meant the families would run. Meant Silver Hollow would die for real this time. Unless. The thought that had been circling in his mind for weeks came back, sharper now, more urgent. He had to pass it on, not just the skills, the responsibility. The weight of standing when running made more sense, and there was only one person he trusted to carry it. 3 days later, he managed to walk. It wasn't pretty. He leaned heavy on a cane that Martin had carved from oak, and every step sent jolts of pain through his thigh. His left arm hung useless in a sling, but he was upright and moving, which was more than Harris had expected. The town looked different in daylight. The bodies were gone, buried in the scrubland outside town with whatever words people could manage. The blood had been scrubbed from the street, though the stains remained. Buildings showed bullet holes like scars. Some had been boarded up. Others were being repaired by people who'd decided to stay. Elias found Isla at her farm, working the field with her 2 children. She looked up as he approached, shielded her eyes against the sun. You shouldn't be walking, she said. Probably not. She handed the hoe to her eldest, a girl, maybe 12, and walked over. The stitches were still visible on her scalp, angry red lines disappearing into her hairline. Her left eye was still bruised, yellow and purple, fading to green. How are you feeling? Elias asked. Like I got kicked by a horse. She studied him. You look worse. I feel worse. They stood there in silence for a moment, watching her children work the stubborn earth. The girl was teaching the younger one, a boy maybe 9, how to turn the soil without fighting it. They're good kids, Elias said. They are. Isla's voice was soft. They deserve better than this. Better than what? Than a mother who fights in the street, than a town that attracts violence, than a life where every day you're wondering if someone's going to ride in and burn everything down. You want to leave. I want my kids to be safe. She looked at him. But I also know there's nowhere that's really safe. Not out here, not anywhere. Safety's just an illusion we tell ourselves so we can sleep at night. That why you stayed? Because running's just as dangerous? I stayed because you taught me that standing matters, that choosing to protect something is better than letting it die by default. She crossed her arms. I stayed because someone has to. Isn't that what you said? Yeah. Well, I heard you. She gestured toward the town. We all did. Martin's talking about organizing watches. Catherine wants to build real fortifications. Even the families who are planning to leave are reconsidering. You showed them it's possible to fight back, to survive. I got 5 people killed. 5 people chose to stand. There's a difference. Her voice was firm. You didn't force anyone. You just showed them it was possible to choose. Elias shifted his weight, leaning heavier on the cane. His leg was shaking with the effort of standing. I can't do it anymore, he said quietly. Isla nodded. Harris told me. Said your body's done. So the town needs someone else, someone who can stand when the next threat comes. Someone who knows what I know. You mean me? Yes. She was quiet, watching her children work. The girl was laughing at something the boy had said. Normal kid sounds, the kind of sounds that shouldn't exist in a place like Silver Hollow, but did anyway. I'm not you, Isla said finally. I can't do what you do. You already did. You stood with me, fought beside me, made the hard choices. With you there, with your guidance. She turned to face him fully. Alone. I'm just a farmer with a rifle. That's not enough. It's more than enough. You know why? Elias met her eyes. Because you're not trying to die for something. You're trying to live for something. That makes you smarter than I ever was. I don't feel smart. I feel scared. Good. Fear keeps you careful, keeps you thinking. He adjusted the sling on his arm. I need to teach you the rest. Everything I know about reading situations, about making the calculations, about knowing when to fight and when to let it go. How much time do we have? However long it takes. She looked at her children again, then back at him. All right, but not today. Today you need to rest before you fall over. Tomorrow then. Tomorrow. They started the next day at dawn. Elias couldn't demonstrate anymore, not with his body broken, so he taught with words instead. They sat on his porch while the sun came up and he walked her through scenarios, made her think through every angle. A gang rides in, 6 men. They're not shooting yet, but they're armed. What do? Assess their intent. Watch their body language. They're tense, hands near their guns. What does that tell you? They're ready to fight but haven't committed yet. So I give them a chance to leave before it escalates. How? I stand where they can see me. Make it clear the town's defended. Let them choose. And if they choose violence, then I make sure they regret it. Day after day, they worked through it. Not just tactics, but philosophy. The weight of making decisions that got people killed. The burden of being the one who stood when others couldn't. You're going to fail sometimes, Elias said one morning. Going to make the wrong call. Let someone get hurt who didn't need to. How do you handle that? Isla thought about it. I remember why I'm standing. Remember that doing nothing would hurt more people than doing something wrong. That's a good answer, but it's not enough when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning replaying the moment. Then what is enough? Nothing, Elias said honestly. Nothing's enough. You just carry it and keep moving. She didn't like that answer. He could see it in her face, but she accepted it because she understood now that some truths were uncomfortable. Martin joined them sometimes, adding his own perspective. He'd fought in the war 30 years back, had seen violence on a scale that made Silver Hollow's battles look like schoolyard fights. His wisdom was different from Elias's, more about surviving than winning. The trick is knowing your limits, Martin told Isla one afternoon. Elias never learned that. He'd stand against 100 men if they came. But you're smarter, you know when to fold. Folding means people die, Isla said. Standing when you can't win means you die and then people die anyway. Martin tapped his temple. Smart fighting's about picking battles you can actually win, or at least make so costly that the enemy thinks twice about the next one. The weeks turned into months. Elias's body healed slowly, imperfectly. His shoulder stayed stiff. His left arm regained some function, but would never be what it was. Walking without the cane was possible, but painful. Harris had been right. His fighting days were over. But his teaching days weren't. He showed Isla everything. Where to position defenders, how to read terrain, how to make a town defensible without turning it into a fortress. More importantly, he taught her how to think like someone who had to make impossible choices. 3 riders approach, he'd say. One's a woman. She's injured. The men with her say they're her brothers, that she needs a doctor, but something feels wrong. What do you do? Isla would work through it, ask questions, consider angles. Sometimes she'd get it right, sometimes she wouldn't. But she was learning. And the town was learning too. Martin organized watches like he'd promised. People took turns keeping an eye on the approaches to Silver Hollow, ready to raise the alarm if trouble came. Catherine convinced everyone to contribute labor and materials to building real barricades at the main entrances. Nothing fancy, but enough to make a difference. The families who'd stayed started talking about the future like it might actually exist. Plans for expanding the church, discussion of bringing in more settlers. Even talk of establishing some kind of formal law, though nobody could agree on what that would look like. Silver Hollow was becoming something it hadn't been in years. It was becoming hopeful. One evening, 6 months after the battle with Sawyer, Elias sat with Isla on his porch watching the sun set. "I think you're ready," he said. "For what?" "To stand alone." She was quiet for a long time. "I don't feel ready." Nobody ever does, but ready isn't about feeling confident. It's about being willing to try anyway. "What if I fail?" "Then you'll fail, and you'll learn from it, and you'll try again." He looked at her. "I failed plenty. Daniel Cross died because I didn't position him right. Maria Santos got shot because I misjudged their approach. Samuel Finch died because he chose to stand," Isla interrupted. "Same as the others. You didn't fail them. You gave them the chance to matter." Elias wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd been carrying guilt that didn't belong to him. "You're going to be better at this than I was," he said finally. "Why?" "Because you've got something to live for. That makes you think different, smarter. You had something to live for." "I had a memory I was trying to protect. That's not the same as having a future." He gestured toward the town. "You've got kids, got people depending on you. That changes the math." Isla pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them. "I'm scared, Elias." "Good." "How is that good?" "Because fear means you understand the stakes. Means you'll take it seriously instead of treating it like a game." He adjusted his position, trying to ease the ache in his leg. "The men who scare me are the ones who aren't scared. They make stupid choices." They sat in silence, watching the sky turn orange and red and purple. Somewhere in the town, someone was playing a fiddle. The sound carried on the evening air, surprisingly sweet. "When do I start?" Isla asked. "You already started. 6 months ago when you asked me to teach you. This is just the next part." "What's the next part?" "You stand alone. Make your own decisions. Handle the next threat without me there to guide you." "And where will you be?" Elias smiled. It hurt his face, muscles unused to the expression. "I'll be right here. Watching, supporting, but not leading. That's your job now." She nodded slowly. "All right. All right." The winter came hard that year. Snow fell in the borderlands, which was unusual. Most years they got cold but stayed dry. This year, the sky opened up and dumped white across everything, transforming Silver Hollow into something almost beautiful. Elias spent most of it inside, his body protesting the cold. His shoulder ached constantly now. The old bullet wound in his side had never healed quite right, and the cold made it worse. Some mornings he could barely get out of bed. Harris visited regularly, bringing medicine that helped a little and conversation that helped more. "You're dying," Harris said one particularly cold afternoon. Not accusatory, just stating fact. "I know." "How long have you known?" "Since the fight with Sawyer, maybe before." Elias sat by the small stove, wrapped in blankets. "Body's been telling me for a while. I just didn't want to listen. Most men don't. They fight it until the end, like dying something you can shoot." Harris poured them both coffee from the pot on the stove. "But you seem different, accepting it." "I'm not accepting it. I'm just done fighting it." Elias took the offered cup. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" "Accepting means giving up. This is just recognizing what's true." He sipped the coffee. It was terrible, burnt and bitter. "I've got maybe a year, maybe less. I want to use it right." "Meaning?" Meaning making sure Isla's ready, making sure the town can survive without me, making sure what I built doesn't die when I do. Harris nodded. That's good. That's smart. Most men don't think about legacy until it's too late. I didn't have anything to leave behind before. No kids, no family, just this town and the choice I made to protect it. Elias set the cup down. Now I've got someone who can carry it forward. That's more than I expected. They sat in companionable silence, two old men warming themselves against the cold and the certainty of endings. Spring came slowly. The snow melted, turned everything to mud. Then the mud dried, and Silver Hollow looked like itself again, dusty, worn, stubbornly alive. Elias's health deteriorated through the winter and didn't improve with the weather. He could barely walk now, even with the cane. His breathing was labored, his heartbeat irregular, skipping and racing at random, but his mind was still sharp. He spent his days on the porch when weather allowed, watching the town move around him. Isla came by daily, reporting on the watches, the preparations, the small dramas of a community learning to defend itself. "We had a situation yesterday," she said one morning. "Tell me." "Two riders came in from the south, said they were traders, wanted to sell supplies." She sat on the step below him. But something felt off. The way they looked at the town, the questions they asked. "What did you do?" "I told them we weren't buying, let them water their horses, but made it clear they weren't welcome to stay." She paused. "They left without argument." "You think they were scouting?" "Maybe, or maybe I was being paranoid." "Paranoid keeps you alive." Elias studied her. "How'd you feel making that call?" "Uncertain. What if they were just traders? What if I turned away people who could have helped the town? And what if they were scouting for a gang? What if letting them stay gave away information that gets people killed next month?" She nodded. "That's what I figured. Better to err on the side of caution." "Exactly." Elias smiled. "You're learning." "I had a good teacher. You had a stubborn old man who didn't know when to quit. There's a difference." She laughed. It was a good sound, the kind of sound that said she was handling the weight without being crushed by it. More riders came as spring turned to summer. Most were legitimate. Drifters looking for work, families hoping to settle, a few merchants testing whether Silver Hollow was worth the risk. Isla handled each situation with growing confidence. She made good calls more often than bad ones. When she made mistakes, she learned from them. She was becoming what the town needed, what Elias had been, but better. One evening in late summer, as the heat pressed down and made everything shimmer, Elias called her to his porch. "I need to tell you something," he said. She sat, waited. "I'm dying, for real this time. Harris says maybe a month, maybe less." Isla's expression didn't change, but he saw her hands tighten on her knees. "I know. You know." "Harris told me, asked me to check on you more often, make sure you're not alone when it happens." Elias shook his head. "Everyone's got opinions about my dying. Can you blame us?" She looked at him. "You matter, Elias, to the town, to me. We don't want you to go." "I don't particularly want to go either, but wanting doesn't change what's coming." He leaned back in his chair. "I need you to promise me something." "What?" "When I'm gone, you keep standing, no matter what comes, no matter how hard it gets. You keep protecting this place." "You know I will." "I need to hear you say it." She met his eyes. "I promise. I'll stand. I'll protect them. I'll carry what you taught me, and I'll pass it on when my time comes." "Good." Elias felt something loosen in his chest. Relief, maybe. "That's good." They sat together as the sun set, watching Silver Hollow settle in for another night. Somewhere a child laughed. Somewhere else, a dog barked. Normal sounds. Life sounds. The kind of sounds worth protecting. The month stretched into 6 weeks. Elias deteriorated slowly, then quickly. He stopped being able to leave the bed, then stopped being able to sit up. His breathing became a struggle, each breath a fight his body was losing. Harris came daily. Isla came more often. Martin visited when he could. Even Catherine stopped by, bringing soup Elias couldn't eat, and words he appreciated anyway. "Town's doing well," she told him one afternoon. "We've got 30 new families moved in, built 6 new houses. Martin's training people to shoot. Isla's got the watches organized better than I've ever seen." "Good," Elias whispered, speaking hurt now. Everything hurt. "It's because of you," Catherine said. "You showed us it was possible to build something here, to make it last." He wanted to argue that it was them, not him, that they'd built it. He just stood in the way of people who wanted to tear it down, but he didn't have the breath for arguments. Isla was there at the end. She'd taken to sleeping in the chair beside his bed, maintaining watch over him the way he'd maintained watch over the town. It felt appropriate somehow. He woke in the early morning darkness, knowing his body was done. The fight was over. This was the last stand, and it was one he'd lose. "Isla," he whispered. She jerked awake instantly, leaned close. "I'm here. The town is safe, I promise. You'll stand. I'll stand. Always." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she was stronger than she knew, that she'd be better at this than he ever was, that the town was lucky to have her. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded. Hoped she understood. She took his hand, held it. And Elias Crow, the man who stood alone for 4 years, died with someone beside him. The town buried him at sunrise. They put him in the scrubland outside Silver Hollow, in a spot where you could see the whole town spread out below. Martin carved a marker. Catherine organized the service. Nearly everyone who lived in Silver Hollow came. Isla spoke, though she'd planned to let others do the talking. "Elias taught me that standing matters," she said, voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "That choosing to protect something is better than letting it die. He stood for us when we couldn't stand for ourselves, and then he taught us how to stand so we wouldn't need him anymore." She paused, looked at the simple grave. He was stubborn and difficult, and refused to quit, even when quitting made sense. He was also the bravest man I ever knew. And because of him, this town has a future. They lowered him into the ground as the sun climbed higher, turning the sky gold and red. And that evening, Isla stood in the center of Silver Hollow's main street, rifle in her hands, and watched the horizon. Ready. The first weeks after Elias died felt like walking through a house where all the furniture had been moved. Everything looked familiar, but nothing was quite where it should be. Isla fell into the routines he'd taught her. Morning check of the perimeter, afternoon meetings with Martin about the watch rotations, evening walk through town to show herself, to remind everyone that Silver Hollow was still defended. But she felt his absence in every decision. When 2 drifters rode in asking for work, she caught herself turning to ask Elias what he thought before remembering he wasn't there. When a dispute broke out between families over water rights, she handled it herself but wondered afterward if she'd made the right call. When her daughter asked if the bad men were coming back, Isla gave her the same answer Elias would have given, maybe, but we'll be ready, and felt like she was wearing someone else's words. "You're doing fine," Martin told her one evening. They were sitting outside the livery, watching the sun paint the sky red. "Better than fine, actually." "Doesn't feel like it." "It never does." "You think Elias felt confident?" "Man second-guessed himself constantly, just didn't show it." Martin packed tobacco into his pipe with thick fingers. "Difference between you and him is you're willing to admit you don't have all the answers. That's actually better." "How is doubt better than certainty?" "Because certainty gets people killed. Doubt makes you think before you act." He lit the pipe, drew on it. Elias was certain. Certain he had to stand. Certain he couldn't let anyone help. That certainty cost him his life, and nearly cost us the town. Isla hadn't thought about it that way. She'd always seen Elias's certainty as strength, but maybe Martin was right. Maybe questioning herself was a different kind of strength. "I miss him," she said quietly. "We all do. But missing him doesn't mean we need him." Martin blew smoke into the evening air. "Town's still here, still growing. That's his legacy. Not the standing alone part. The part where he taught us we could stand at all." 3 months after the burial, trouble came. Not the explosive kind Elias had faced, quieter, more insidious. A man named Garrett rode in with 6 others, all of them too clean and too well armed to be simple travelers. He was maybe 40, with the kind of face that looked friendly until you noticed his eyes didn't match his smile. "Heard this town's under new management," he said when Isla met them at the edge of Silver Hollow. "Thought we'd introduce ourselves." "We don't need an introduction. We need you to state your business." "Friendly, aren't you?" Garrett's smile didn't waver. "We're offering a service, protection. For a reasonable fee, we make sure nothing bad happens to your town." Isla felt her grip tighten on her rifle. "We protect ourselves." "I can see that. Heard about what happened with Sawyer." Garrett looked around, taking in the barricades, the fortified positions, the organized layout. "Impressive. But Sawyer's not the only threat out here, and you can't fight everyone. We've done all right so far." "So far, but you lost your guardian, didn't you? Elias Crow. Hell of a fighter from what I hear. Town must feel vulnerable without him." The words were carefully chosen, designed to probe for weakness. Isla recognized the tactic because Elias had taught her about it. When someone wants to take advantage of you, they start by making you feel like you need them. "The town's fine," she said evenly. "We don't need your protection." "Everyone needs protection. That's just the reality of living out here." Garrett shifted in his saddle. "How about this? We stick around a few days, let you see how professional we are. Then we can talk terms." "No." "No? You can water your horses and move on, but you're not staying." Well, Garrett's smile finally faded. "That's not very neighborly." "I'm not your neighbor. I'm the person telling you to leave." One of his men moved his hand toward his gun. Isla's rifle came up instantly, aimed at Garrett's chest. "Don't," she said quietly. The man froze. Garrett raised his hands slowly, deliberately non-threatening. "Easy now, no need for that." "There's every need. You rode in here making veiled threats disguised as offers. You're probing for weakness, and you're not leaving until you get what you came for." Isla's voice was calm, but her finger rested alongside the trigger guard, ready. "So here's what's actually going to happen. You're going to turn around and ride out, and you're going to tell whoever sent you that Silver Hollow doesn't pay protection money. We protect ourselves. And if more than 7 of us come back, then more than 7 of you will regret it." She adjusted her aim slightly. "Sawyer brought 30 men. Ask around about how that worked out for him." Garrett studied her. She could see him calculating, weighing options. He'd come expecting to intimidate a frightened town led by a grieving woman. Instead, he'd found someone who'd learned from the best. "All right," he said finally. "We'll go, but you're making a mistake." "I've made plenty. This isn't one of them." They left. Slowly, watching over their shoulders, but they left. Isla stood in the street until they were out of sight, rifle still ready, heart pounding. Only when the dust settled did she allow herself to breathe. Martin emerged from his position near the livery. "You handled that well. He'll be back." "Probably, but not today. And by the time he comes back, we'll be more ready." Martin walked over, put a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, Isla. Elias would have been proud." She wasn't sure about that. Elias would have probably handled it differently, maybe better, but she'd handled it her way, and it had worked. That had to count for something. Garrett came back 3 weeks later, this time with 15 men. Isla was ready. The watches had spotted them an hour out, giving the town time to prepare. Families moved to the church. Defenders took their positions. Not just Ela and Martin now, but 8 others who'd been training. Not perfect shots, not experienced fighters, but willing to stand. Isla met Garrett in the same place as before, but this time she wasn't alone. Martin stood at the livery entrance with his shotgun. 2 others were positioned on rooftops. 3 more covered the side approaches. All visible, all armed. "You brought more friends," Isla said. "You convinced me you were serious." Garrett looked around at the prepared positions, the organized defense. "But I brought more friends too." "I can see that. Doesn't change my answer." "You really think 9 people can stop 15? "I think 15 men can ride in here and maybe take the town, but not without losing half of you in the process. Maybe more." Isla's voice was steady. "And that's if you win. If you don't, then all 15 of you die for nothing. Is this town worth that math? Garrett was silent for a moment. You're bluffing. Am I? Isla raised her voice slightly. Martin, you got a clear shot on the man in the black hat? Clear as day, Martin called back. I've got the one on the gray horse, a voice from a rooftop added. Samuel's widow, Isla knew. Woman had learned to shoot just to honor her husband's choice to stand. That leaves 13, Isla said, looking directly at Garrett. We've got 6 more rifles positioned. You do the math. Garrett did. She could see it happening behind his eyes, the same calculation Sawyer had made. Risk versus reward, cost versus gain. This is a mistake, he said. You keep saying that, but you're the one who keeps riding away. There are easier towns. Then go find one. Isla took a step forward. Because this one's not available. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned his horse. Let's go. His men looked confused, frustrated. One started to argue, but Garrett cut him off. I said, let's go. They rode out, leaving nothing but dust and the memory of another threat turned away. Isla stood in the street until they were gone, then allowed herself to lean against the nearest post. Her legs were shaking, her hands too. The adrenaline was draining away, leaving exhaustion in its wake. Martin came over. That's twice. You see, he won't come back a third time. No, but someone else will. Isla straightened up. There's always someone else. And we'll be ready, same as today, same as we were with Sawyer. Martin smiled. You're getting good at this. I'm getting tired of this. Those aren't mutually exclusive. The town celebrated that night. Nothing formal, but people gathered in the street, shared food, told stories. The kind of spontaneous community that happens when people survive something together. Isla's children were there, running with other kids in the twilight. Her daughter Elena came over at one point. Mama, why do the bad men keep coming? It was a fair question, deserved a fair answer. Because there's bad men in the world, Isla said, and they look for places that seem weak, places they can take from. But we're not weak. No, we're not. But they don't know that until they try. When will they stop trying? Isla pulled her daughter close. When the word spreads that Silver Hollow isn't worth the cost, when enough of them ride in and ride out with nothing to show for it, then they'll leave us alone. How long will that take? I don't know, baby. Maybe a long time, maybe not so long. She kissed the top of Elena's head. But until then, we keep standing. That's all we can do. The years that followed proved her right. More threats came. None as organized as Garrett. None as personal as Sawyer. But they came. Drifters testing boundaries. Small gangs looking for easy targets. Men who'd heard about Silver Hollow's defenses and wanted to see if the stories were true. Each time Isla stood. Sometimes with bloodshed, more often without. She learned that Elias had been right about something important. Most fights could be won before the shooting started, if you were willing to stand firm and make the cost clear. The town grew. New families arrived, drawn by word that Silver Hollow was defended. The population doubled, then tripled. Buildings went up. A proper school opened. Catherine convinced a circuit judge to stop by once a month. Martin trained enough people that the watches became a legitimate force. Silver Hollow stopped being a dying border town and became something else. Not prosperous, exactly. The land was still hard. The weather still brutal. But it was a place where families could build futures, where children could grow up without constant fear. Isla turned 45, then 46. Her children grew tall and strong. Elena started training with the rifle, despite Isla's initial reluctance. Her son, Thomas, learned to read faster than anyone expected and started helping at the school. 5 years after Elias died, Isla stood in the same spot where he'd stood so many times, the center of the main street, watching the eastern horizon. Martin walked up beside her. He was 70 now, moving slower, but still sharp. Remembering? He asked. Always. Isla shifted her rifle to her other shoulder, thinking about what he'd say if he could see the town now. He'd probably complain that we're getting soft, that we need more training, better positions, harder discipline. Isla smiled. Yeah, that sounds like him. But he'd be proud too. Underneath all that stubborn certainty, he'd be proud. They stood in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned to stand together. You ever think about stopping? Martin asked. About letting someone else take over the watches? You've earned rest. Every day. But then I think about what Elias taught me. About how standing matters. About how protection isn't something you do until it's convenient to stop. It's something you carry until you can pass it on. You've already passed it on. Half the town knows how to fight now. They don't need you the way they used to. Maybe not, but I made a promise to Elias, to myself. I said I'd stand. She looked at Martin. I'm not done yet. Fair enough. But when you are, you let me know. Because I'm too old for this, and I'm only here because you are. Deal. The threat came in Isla's 8th year as Silver Hollow's guardian. Not from the east this time. From the north. A gang led by a woman named Veronica Cross, who'd made a name for herself by taking towns and holding them, establishing herself as the local power and extracting tribute. She came with 40 men. It was the largest force Silver Hollow had ever faced. The watches spotted them 2 hours out. Isla called an emergency meeting in the church, everyone who could fight and many who couldn't. We can't win this, someone said. A man named Peters who'd moved to town 3 years back. 40 against maybe 20 defenders? The math doesn't work. The math never works, Isla replied. It didn't work when Elias stood against 8. It didn't work when we fought Sawyer. It doesn't work now, but we're still here. That was different. Elias was one man, Isla interrupted. Just one stubborn man who decided standing mattered more than running. And he taught us to do the same. So yes, the math's bad. But we've faced bad math before. We should negotiate, Peters insisted. Find out what she wants. Maybe we can... She wants the town, Martin said flatly. That's what people like her always want. Control, power. And if we give it to her, everything we've built dies. Better than us dying. Is it? Isla looked around the room. Is living under someone else's boot better than standing for what's ours? Because I don't think so. And I don't think most of you do either. The room was quiet. People looked at each other, at their families, at the life they'd built here. I'll stand, said Samuel's widow. Same as before. Me too, said Daniel's son, now 19 and built like his father had been. And me, said Catherine. One by one, they committed. Not everyone. Some families chose to leave, loading wagons and heading west. Isla didn't blame them. Standing wasn't for everyone, and the stakes were higher than they'd ever been, but 23 people stayed and said they'd fight. 23 against 40. Isla spent the remaining time preparing like Elias had taught her. Barricades repositioned, firing lanes established, supplies distributed. Every defender assigned a position with clear instructions and fallback routes. But this time she did something Elias never had. She went to meet Veronica before the fight started, rode out alone to where the gang was camped, hands visible, rifle slung across her back. Veronica was younger than Isla expected, maybe 35. Scarred face, hard eyes, but intelligent. She looked at Isla with something like curiosity. You're the one who runs this town, Veronica said. I protect it. There's a difference. Not from where I'm sitting. Veronica gestured to a stump. Sit. Let's talk. They sat across from each other like they were negotiating a business deal instead of a potential battle. I've heard about you, Veronica said, about this town, how you turned away Garrett, how you fought Sawyer years back. Impressive. Then you know we'll fight. I figured, but I wanted to meet you first, wanted to see if you were smart or just stubborn. Maybe both. Veronica smiled. It wasn't friendly, but it was genuine. I like you. So I'm going to be straight. I've got 40 fighters. You've got maybe 20. I can take this town. We'll take it, if that's what it comes to. But I'd rather not lose half my people doing it. Then don't try. Can't do that either. I've got a reputation to maintain. People hear I back down from a border town with 20 guns. I look weak. Weak gets you killed in my business. Isla understood. It was the same logic that had driven Sawyer. Pride and power were currencies out here, and both had to be maintained. "So what do you want?" Isla asked. "I want you to be smart. Surrender the town. I'll let your people stay. Charge reasonable taxes. Provide actual protection. You can even keep your position. Work for me. Everyone wins. Except we lose our freedom." "Freedom to what? Struggle? Barely survive?" "I'm offering stability." "At the cost of control." "Control's an illusion anyway. You're already at the mercy of whoever decides to ride in with enough guns. At least with me, you know what you're getting." It was a reasonable argument. Isla could see the logic. Veronica wasn't offering slavery, just submission, trade independence for security. It was the bargain people had made throughout history, but it was also everything Elias had stood against. "I can't do that," Isla said. "Can't or won't?" "Both." Isla stood. This town was dying when Elias decided to stand. He could have left, could have let it fade, but he chose to fight for it, and that choice made it something worth protecting. Not because of what it was, but because of what that choice represented. And what's that? That sometimes you stand even when the math doesn't work. Sometimes you fight even when you'll probably lose. Because the alternative is accepting that might makes right, and if we accept that, then nothing means anything. Veronica stood too. "That's beautiful. It's also stupid." "Maybe, but it's what we're doing. You're going to get your people killed. They're making their own choice, same as I'm making mine, same as you're making yours." Isla started walking back to her horse. "Come at us if you want. We'll be ready. I will come, and you'll lose." "Probably." Isla mounted up. "But you'll pay for it, and that cost will follow you to the next town, and the next. Eventually, the math stops working for you too." She rode back to Silver Hollow without waiting for a response. Martin met her at the edge of town. "How'd it go?" "She's coming." "Figured. Was worth trying, though." "Yeah." Isla dismounted. "Get everyone in position. This is it." The fight started at dawn. Veronica's gang came hard and fast, trying to overwhelm the defenses through pure numbers. But Isla had learned from Elias's playbook. The barricades funneled them. The crossfire caught them. The defenders fought smart instead of brave, taking shots from cover and falling back when pressed. But 40 was still 40. The gang pushed through the outer defenses, took the livery, pressed toward the center of town. Isla's people fought hard, but they were being pushed back, compressed into smaller and smaller spaces. Isla saw Martin go down, shotgun empty, leg bleeding. Saw Catherine fall back with an arm wound. Saw others dropping, retreating, breaking. They were losing. She stood in the center of the street, rifle in hand, and made the calculation Elias had made so many times. The town couldn't hold. Not against this. They'd hurt Veronica's gang badly. Maybe half her people were down, but not enough. In another hour, maybe less, Silver Hollow would fall. Unless someone changed the equation. Isla raised her rifle and shot the man nearest to Veronica, then shifted and shot another. Drew her revolver and fired twice more. Every shot aimed at the people closest to the gang leader. Veronica noticed, turned her attention fully to Isla. "You want me?" Isla shouted across the chaos. "Here I am." Veronica smiled and raised her gun. What happened next took maybe 10 seconds, but felt longer. Veronica fired. Isla dove left, came up shooting. Missed. Veronica fired again. The bullet clipped Isla's shoulder and she spun, going down. But as she fell, she saw movement from the eastern edge of town. Riders, maybe 30 of them, coming fast. For a moment she thought it was reinforcements for Veronica. Thought the fight was truly over. Then she recognized the lead rider, Garrett. The protection racketeer she'd turned away years ago rode straight into the fight, his men spreading out, and opened fire on Veronica's gang. "Nobody takes this town," he shouted. "Nobody but me." It was the stupidest territorial display Isla had ever seen. It was also exactly what they needed. Caught between two forces, Veronica's gang broke. Some fought, some ran, some just threw down their weapons and surrendered. Veronica herself fought until Garrett's men cornered her. Then she lowered her gun and walked forward with her hands raised. The shooting stopped. Silence fell over Silver Hollow, broken only by moans of wounded and the nervous shifting of horses. Isla pushed herself up, shoulder bleeding, and walked toward where Garrett sat his horse. "Why?" she asked. "Because I called dibs on this town years ago." He grinned. "Can't have someone else moving in on my territory." "This isn't your territory. Isn't hers either, and you proved you can't hold it alone." He looked around at the damage, the wounded defenders. "So here's my offer, same as before, protection, for a fee. But this time, you don't have a choice." Isla raised her revolver. Her arm shook, but the barrel was aimed at his chest. "We always have a choice," she said. Garrett looked at her, at the wounded defenders rallying behind her, at the town that had fought off 40 attackers and was somehow still standing. "You're insane," he said. "Probably, but we're also still here." Isla thumbed back the hammer. "So here's my offer. You take your people and leave. We'll tend our wounded and bury our dead. And you don't come back. And if I do, then we fight again and again and again, until you realize this town costs more than it's worth." Garrett sat there for a long moment. Then he started laughing. Not mockery. Something closer to disbelief. "You people really don't quit." "No, we don't." "Fine." He turned his horse. "But when you change your mind, when you realize you need help, don't come asking. This was your last chance." "We won't ask." He rode out with his men, leaving Veronica and her wounded behind. The aftermath was brutal. 7 defenders dead, 12 wounded, some seriously. Veronica's gang had lost 23. The town was shot to pieces, buildings burned, the livery was gone. The church had taken so much damage it might not be salvageable. But Silver Hollow still stood. Isla organized the recovery like she'd organized the defense. Wounded to Doc Harris. Dead prepared for burial. Prisoners secured, repairs cataloged. It took 3 days of constant work before things settled into something resembling normal. On the 4th day, she stood at Elias's grave. "We won," she told the marker. "Barely. Lost people. Damn near lost everything. But we won." The wind blew across the scrubland, carrying dust and the smell of coming rain. "I don't know how you did this for 4 years. Stood alone against everything, carried the weight without sharing it." She knelt, touched the rough wood. "I'm not that strong. I can't be what you were." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. She'd stood, she'd fought. She'd led people through the worst and brought them out the other side. Not alone, the way Elias had. But that was the point, wasn't it? She'd learned from his strength and his mistakes both. Standing didn't mean standing alone. It meant being willing to stand even when the cost was high. Even when the math didn't work. Even when running made more sense. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for teaching me, for showing me it was possible." She stood, walked back to town. Martin was waiting on the porch of what used to be his livery. His leg was bandaged, crutch beside him. "We're thinking of building a wall," he said. "Real one this time. Stone, if we can manage it. Make it harder for the next gang. The next gang will find a way. They always do. Probably, but we'll make them work for it." He shifted his weight. "Town council wants to make your position official, guardian of Silver Hollow, with authority to organize defenses, train militia, make decisions in crisis. I don't need a title. It's not about need. It's about giving you the authority to do what you're already doing. And it's about making sure when you're gone, the position continues. Someone else steps up." Isla thought about that. About legacy. About passing on not just skills, but responsibility. "All right," she said, "but only if the position comes with mandatory training. Whoever takes over after me needs to know what they're doing." "Agreed." Martin smiled. "You're thinking like a leader." "I'm thinking like someone who's tired and wants to make sure this doesn't fall apart when I can't do it anymore. That's what leaders do." The years continued. Silver Hollow rebuilt, stronger than before. The wall went up, not stone, but thick timber reinforced with earth. More families came. The population reached 500, then kept growing. Isla trained others the way Elias had trained her. Not just shooting, but thinking. Not just tactics, but philosophy. She passed on the lessons about standing when running made more sense, about making impossible choices and living with them. About protecting not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Her daughter Elena became one of the best shots in town. Took to the training like she'd been born for it. By the time she was 25, she was leading the watches herself. Isla turned 50, then 55. Her shoulder never healed right from Veronica's bullet. Her hands started shaking when she was tired. Her eyes weren't what they used to be. She was getting old. One evening, 10 years after the fight with Veronica, she called Elena to her house. "I need to talk to you," Isla said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm just getting old." Isla sat at her table, the same table where she'd eaten dinner with her family for 20 years. "I can't be guardian forever. My body won't let me." Elena nodded slowly. "Who are you thinking?" "You." Her daughter blinked. "Me?" "You're ready. You've been ready for years. You know the tactics. You understand the weight. You've made the hard calls." "I don't know if I can do what you did." "You can't. Nobody can. Same way I couldn't do what Elias did." Isla reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. "But you can do what you do. You can stand in your own way, with your own strengths. That's all the town needs." "What if I fail?" "Then you'll fail and learn and try again. Same as I did. Same as Elias did." Isla squeezed her hand. "Standing isn't about being perfect. It's about being willing." Elena was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. "All right, I'll do it." "Good. Then we start tomorrow. I'll teach you what I know about leadership, about making the decisions nobody else wants to make, about carrying the weight without letting it crush you." "How long do we have?" "However long it takes." They trained together for 2 years. Not the physical training, Elena had that mastered, but the harder lessons, the ones about judgment and wisdom and knowing when to fight and when to let go. Isla passed on everything Elias had taught her, and everything she'd learned on her own. The mistakes she'd made, the successes that only looked like successes from the outside, the nights she'd lain awake wondering if she'd gotten people killed for nothing. And she passed on the most important lesson of all. "Standing matters," she told Elena one evening. "Not because it always works, not because you'll always win, but because the choice to stand, to protect something bigger than yourself, that's what makes us human. That's what makes life worth living, even when it costs everything, especially then." When Isla was 57, she officially stepped down as guardian of Silver Hollow. The town held a ceremony. People spoke. Catherine, ancient now but still organizing everything, gave a speech about courage and legacy. Martin, 90 years old and held together by stubbornness, told stories about the early days. And Elena stood in front of the whole town and took the oath that Isla had taken years before. The oath to protect, to stand, to carry the weight so others didn't have to. Isla watched and felt something settle in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or relief. Or just the satisfaction of knowing the work would continue. The first test came 3 months later. A gang of 12 rode in from the west. Not huge, but big enough to be dangerous. They came expecting a town run by the daughter of a legend, expecting weakness, expecting an easy target. Elena met them the same way Isla had met Garrett all those years ago. Same way Isla had met Veronica. Same way Elias had met every threat that came to Silver Hollow. She stood in the center of the street, rifle in hand, and gave them a choice. Leave or regret it. Isla watched from her porch as the gang leader calculated. Watched him look at Elena, at the defenders on the rooftops, at the walls and barricades and the town that had learned to protect itself. Watched him make the same choice so many others had made. He turned his horse and left. Elena stood in the street until they were gone, then walked over to Isla's house. "How'd I do, she asked. "You stood. That's all that matters." "I was scared." "Good. Fear keeps you sharp." Isla smiled. "But you didn't let it stop you. That's the difference." Elias would have been proud, same as I am." Isla pulled her daughter close. "You're not him. You're not me. You're you, and that's exactly what the town needs." Elena nodded against her shoulder. "Thank you for everything. Thank you for carrying it forward." They stood together on the porch, guardian and former guardian, mother and daughter, watching Silver Hollow settle into another evening. And somewhere beyond the horizon, more threats would come. More gangs would test the town's defenses. More choices would have to be made about standing or running, fighting or fleeing. But Silver Hollow would endure. Because Elias Crow had made a choice 40 years ago to stand alone. And because Isla Moreno had learned from him and chosen to stand together. And because Elena would carry that forward to the next generation and the one after that. The legacy wasn't in the violence, it was in the choice. The willingness to stand, the refusal to let might make right. The stubborn certainty that some things were worth protecting even when the cost was high. That was what made Silver Hollow more than just another dying border town. It was a place where people stood, and standing, they learned, was the only thing that ever really mattered. Isla lived another 8 years, long enough to see Silver Hollow grow into something that almost resembled a real town. Long enough to see Elena become the leader she'd always known she could be. Long enough to train her grandson in the same lessons Elias had taught her all those years ago. She died quietly one morning, sitting on her porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over the town she'd protected for so long. They buried her next to Elias, their graves side by side, two guardians who'd given everything to protect something bigger than themselves. Elena stood at the burial and spoke the same words her mother had spoken at Elias's grave. She taught me that standing matters, that choosing to protect something is better than letting it die. She stood for us, and because of her, we know how to stand for ourselves. The town had grown to nearly 1,000 souls now. The wall was stone. The defenses were professional. A territorial marshal visited quarterly. Silver Hollow had law, order, schools, and a future. But it had started with one old man who decided that standing mattered more than living. And it had survived because of a woman who'd learned that lesson and passed it on. Elena looked at the two graves, the two people who'd shaped everything she was. "I'll keep standing," she promised them both. "I'll carry what you taught me, and when my time comes, I'll pass it on too." The wind blew across the scrubland, carrying the promise forward, carrying the legacy on. And somewhere in Silver Hollow, a child asked her mother why people stood when running was easier. And the mother, who'd been taught by someone who'd been taught by someone who'd learned from Elias Crow himself, gave the answer that had echoed through generations. Because standing is how we choose who we are. Running is letting circumstances choose for us. And sometimes the only way to truly live is to stand for something worth dying for. The child didn't fully understand, not yet. But one day she would. One day she'd face her own choice about standing or running, and when that day came, she'd remember the stories, she'd remember the legacy. And she'd stand. Because that's what people did in Silver Hollow. They stood.